Having children is child abuse. Understanding parenthood as selfish exploitation. Most people understand procreation to be a right, a sacrosanct act that anybody and everybody has full entitlement to perform. Legally, it is usually the case, but that doesn't make it moral. People become quite twitchy and irrational when this is pointed out, but it's perfectly sound to question whether people should have the right to cast a new life into the world without the consent of the being they're creating. Biological desire alone does not justify any action. The problem for many is trying to separate their own instinctive emotions from the process of rational contemplation. For the main part, humans are hardwired to reproduce. It is a core program that can take control of the whole organism. So it is understandable that some find it difficult to examine the morality of their needs, especially those who have spent less time cultivating self-reflection and critically examining their behavioral drives. To begin with, it can be helpful to try an imaginative exercise. Wherever you are right now, whoever you are with, imagine that there is one more person with you, not someone you know or have read about, but someone who has definitely never existed, not even as a zygote, an entirely new person. Imagine their form, shape, personality, the clothes they might be wearing, their job, the food they like, and the way they smile. Now ask yourself, did you ever miss that person? The chances are that you've never given a second thought to that person. Why would you? So you've also never missed them, never needed them, and never worried about what they're missing out on. This is how we should think about the pre-person, the potential person who is not yet created. However, when contemplating the pre-person, people often consider them to be an existing person, a person with desires and preferences, a person who can experience good things like love and joy, and who are deprived of those things if they do not come into being. This is a mistake. The pre-person cannot experience anything. They have no needs, no desire, nobody misses them, and they are not missing anything, not even you. So, when we consider the ethics of dragging the pre-person into actuality, we must consider the change of state we are initiating. From a non-being who cannot experience anything, a breeder makes a being who can experience all the good things and bad things of life. As a non-being, they didn't miss any of the good things, they didn't need them or want them, so they weren't missing out, there was no deprivation. Once a being exists, they have potential to experience good things, but always at the price of suffering. Not only that, but the good things are often temporary and only arise out of meeting needs that arise from being alive, needs that didn't exist previously and were not necessary to create. The desire to have a child is entirely selfish. The child never consents, they never demand that their parents give them life, and if you think of any utilitarian reason for creating a child, you are committing an act of abuse. Continuance of the species, the race, the nation, or any such factor is neither moral nor rational. Bacteria do the same. They are not moral nor rational. In fact, it is perfectly reasonable to point out that the very act of creating a child is, in and of itself, an act of abuse. I will show you how. The NSPCC definition is that child abuse happens when someone harms a child. In the UK, a child is a person who has yet to reach the age of 18. Yes, that means we have child soldiers. Armed forces can recruit from age 16 and groom from any age. Maltreatment is the act or failure to act, whereas harm is the consequence. Any act or omission leading to harm, whether deliberate or through neglect, would therefore be considered maltreatment. Many children are harmed in the womb, but every child is harmed in the process of childbirth, which is an incredibly upsetting and painful experience for them, and one they did not agree to, unlike the vast majority of mothers who know full well what is coming, and if they don't, they need to take more responsibility and find out. So we're already over the bar. Harm cannot be avoided if you create a child. No child can consent to that harm. The harm is being inflicted for the utility of meeting the needs of the parents, or perhaps the needs of others. Therefore, procreation is an act of child abuse. There is more weight to the argument. Once out in the world, further significant harm is absolutely certain. 60% of children under 5 regularly suffer physical or psychological violence at the hands of their caregivers. 20% of women and 14% of men report having been sexually abused as a child. Around 100,000 children are murdered every year, not including conflict and war crimes. 4,500 people between 10 and 24 years old die every day. More than 1 in 7 children suffer from a recognized mental health disorder. Roughly 1 in 5 children suffer with chronic pain. Around 20% of children report being unhappy about a significant aspect of their lives. 1 in 4 children have self-harmed. Nearly half of children have bullied other children. Also consider, it is likely that there are over 300 million people who are clinical psychopaths and a much larger number who have psychopathic tendencies. Currently, there are more than 26,000 recognized human diseases. This can only increase. Suicidality is increasing among young people. Water pollution is widespread, global, and worsening overall. Air pollution is ubiquitous and unavoidable. Most commercially grown food contains toxins from agricultural chemicals or from contaminated soil. War and conflicts are rising. Weapons of mass destruction and mass suffering are more ubiquitous than ever. There is increasing risk of the spread of untreatable diseases. Basic resources such as water, food, and shelter are becoming increasingly scarce. The earth undergoes cyclical disasters and mass extinction events. It is likely we are in one. Beyond childhood, there is of course increasing risk of harm of almost all types as life progresses. Potential parents need to understand that every suffering adult was brought into the world at the whim of someone else, and it was not necessary to do so. Look around at the suffering, notice it, understand it, and remember, ultimately, 100% of people die. The process of death is often slow, messy, and very painful. Additionally, there is almost always considerable emotional distress involved. Any being you create will be forced to experience that. Beyond the abusive act of procreation itself, child abuse is invariably underreported and excused. All of these things happen to kids on a regular basis. Anybody who pays attention for a day or two in any moderately populated urban setting will see an act of child abuse. Sexual abuse is perhaps the most prevalent in the minds of the public, but is actually one of the least common forms of abuse. However, it is not as uncommon as people think or wish. It involves engaging in any sexual act with or in the presence of a child. For some, this includes sexual intercourse while pregnant or in the later stages of pregnancy. Anything involving making, watching, or listening to pornography in the presence of a child, making or sharing images of a child that are sexual in nature, encouraging or coercing a child to engage in activities of a sexual nature alone or with others. Neglect. Neglect could be the most common form of abuse. It does not need to be willful or deliberate, but can happen through ignorance, poor education, lack of empathy, and lack of emotional intelligence. Failure to provide adequate food, clothing, or shelter, not undertaking careful supervision of a child to keep them safe from harm or danger, includes leaving them with unsuitable carers, ensuring the child receives appropriate health and dental care, ensuring the child receives an adequate, needs-based education, meeting a child's fundamental emotional needs. Physical abuse. All too common and dismissed far too easily. The physical abuse of children includes hitting a child, smacking is a form of hitting, kicking a child, use of physical force in discipline, shaking a child, throwing a child, burning a child, choking, drowning, or suffocating a child, poisoning a child, making up or causing symptoms of illness, including administering unnecessary medication. Inappropriate use of physical restraint, including locking a child in a room or enclosure. Emotional abuse. The emotional abuse of children is far too common and is also frequently excused or justified. Children often don't understand they are being abused, but they will probably be unhappy. Regular criticism or humiliation of a child, shouting at a child, threatening them or calling them names, making a child the subject of mockery, laying blame on a child for things they haven't done or that weren't their fault, preventing a child from making friends or engaging in social activities, using manipulation to get a child to do something they would not otherwise have done, habitually not responding to a child, persistently use of the cold shoulder or silence, being cold or emotionally unavailable, not being supportive, positive or encouraging, making a child feel worthless, unloved, inadequate or only valued for their utility and serving someone else's needs. Any type of bullying, including cyberbullying. The only way for a potential parent to avoid engaging in child abuse is to avoid having any. Extinction isn't so bad, it will extinguish child abuse and all other forms of human suffering for good.
They say